All right, future IFS officers, buckle up. You know today's deep dive. It's a crucial one for anyone aiming for those coveted seats in South Block. We're unpacking this whole India-Canada relations thing. Think diplomats being expelled, high commissioners packing their bags. It's headline-grabbing stuff. And trust me, this isn't just another news cycle. It's potential gold mine for your UPSC prep.
What's interesting is this isn't like some brand new clash. It's a relationship with history, right?
Yeah.
It's one that's gone through some pretty significant phases.
Yeah, exactly. So before we jump into the current diplomatic drama, let's rewind a bit. Can you give us a crash course on India-Canada relations, sort of the pre-meltdown version, so to speak?
Sure. So Canada is home to a huge Indian diaspora, almost 2 million strong.
Wow.
That alone creates a natural link. And historically, we've seen collaboration in some, pretty important areas.
Right.
For instance, back in 2010, the two countries signed the Nuclear Cooperation Agreement. This paved the way for India to access Canadian uranium for its civilian nuclear program. It was a landmark moment in their bilateral relations.
So a sizable Indian community in Canada, a landmark nuclear deal, all pointing to a pretty solid relationship. But then things took a sharp turn, right? What was the trigger for this diplomatic freefall?
Well, the crux of the issue lies in Canada's perceived support for Khalistani extremist groups. From India's perspective, this is a direct challenge to its sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Now, I know the Khalistan issue can be a bit complex, especially for those who haven't delved into it before. Could you break it down for us? Why is this such a sensitive nerve for India?
So Khalistani groups, they advocate for an independent Sikh state carved out from parts of India. This separatist movement gained traction in the 1980s, but India has consistently maintained that such a demand is completely unacceptable. It goes against the fundamental principle of a united India.
Right. So the very idea of an independent Khalistan is seen as a threat to India's national unity. And Canada's stance on this issue is causing serious friction.
Exactly. Canada allowing these groups to operate freely, even holding unofficial referendums like the one in 2023 on an independent Sikh state. These actions are seen as, deeply disrespectful and even hostile by the Indian government. It's viewed as Canada interfering in India's internal affairs.
And it's not just about the symbolism of these referendums. There are concrete security implications as well, right?
Absolutely. India has, for a long time, been seeking the extradition of individuals accused of terrorism and organized crime who are residing in Canada.
Yeah.
These are people India believes played a role in the Khalistani movement's, violent phase. But these extradition requests haven't yielded much. From India's point of view, this inaction makes Canada look like a safe haven for individuals who pose a direct threat to its national security.
So we have this historical baggage with the Khalistan issue, a clear point of contention. But is there something more to this diplomatic frost? Is it just about the Khalistan issue? Or is there a broader context we need to consider?
Yeah, you're right. It's not just about one issue.
Right.
The Khalistan situation is a major flashpoint, but there are other factors at play. For instance, take the economic front.
Okay.
The Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or CEPA, and the Foreign Investment Promotion and Protection Agreement, or FIPA, have been on the negotiating table for years,
Right.
but progress has been glacial.
Okay, so stalled economic agreements, that definitely adds fuel to the fire.
Yeah.
But how does Canadian domestic politics fit into this equation? Is there an internal angle that's impacting their foreign policy decisions?
Absolutely. The Sikh community, especially in provinces like Ontario and British Columbia, represents a significant voting bloc in Canada.
Right.
This means Canadian politicians have to walk a tightrope,
Right.
balancing domestic considerations with their foreign policy objectives.
I see.
Appeasing the Sikh vote bank sometimes comes at the cost of straining ties with India.
So it's a delicate balancing act for them, keeping the voters happy while managing a complex relationship with a major power like India.
Exactly.
It's a classic dilemma, isn't it? But let's shift gears a bit.
Sure.
Why does this whole India-Canada situation even matter so much? Why should we care about mending fences? What's at stake here?
Well, there are significant strategic and economic interests at play for both countries.
Okay.
On the strategic front, both India and Canada are interested in maintaining a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific region.
Right.
This is becoming increasingly important given China's growing assertiveness in the region.
Right. So there's a common interest in countering China's influence.
Exactly.
It's about finding a balance of power in the Indo-Pacific.
Right.
But what about the economic side? What are we talking about in terms of potential gains or losses?
The bilateral trade volume between India and Canada, encompassing both goods and services, was nearly $10 billion in 2023.
Mm.
And here's something that might surprise you. Canadian pension funds have invested over $75 billion in India.
Wow.
That's a huge vote of confidence in the Indian economy.
Wow, $75 billion. That's a staggering amount.
Yeah.
Clearly, there's a lot of potential for economic cooperation, but also a lot to lose if things continue to sour.
For sure.
So let's talk worst-case scenarios.
Okay.
If things don't improve, what kind of fallout are we looking at?
There are a few potential consequences.
Okay.
First, strategic cooperation could suffer. We've already seen signs of this.
Right.
Remember the Five Eyes Alliance, the intelligence sharing network between the US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand?
Yes, I remember explaining it earlier.
Well, the Five Eyes have been quite cautious in their response to the India-Canada tensions.
Okay.
This hesitation suggests a reluctance to engage with India on sensitive security matters, at least while things remain strained with Canada.
Okay, so potential damage to strategic partnerships, especially with those crucial intelligence sharing networks.
Right.
What else is on the list of potential consequences?
On the economic front, we could see further delays in those trade negotiations we talked about, CEPA and FIPA.
Okay.
This would mean missing out on opportunities to boost bilateral trade and investment.
Right.
It could also create a chilling effect, making businesses and investors hesitant to engage with each other.
So a potential economic slowdown, stalled agreements, and a loss of investor confidence.
Yeah.
Those are some serious repercussions.
They are.
But beyond these big picture impacts, what about the people caught in the crossfire?
Yeah.
What about the human cost of this diplomatic standoff?
You're raising an important point.
Yeah.
The Indian diaspora in Canada, particularly, the estimated 230,000 Indian students studying there are directly affected.
Yeah.
They're facing a lot of uncertainty and anxiety about their future in Canada.
Right.
And on a practical level, disruptions in immigration and visa processing could create huge problems for anyone hoping to study, work, or settle in Canada.
Right. So families are being separated, students are in limbo, and future plans are up in the air.
Exactly.
It's a very real human cost.
It is.
This is pretty bleak. But surely there's a way out of this mess.
Yeah, I think so.
What can India and Canada do to start rebuilding this fractured relationship?
There are paths to reconciliation, but both sides need to be willing to step up. The first and most crucial step is open and honest dialogue. They need to engage in high-level talks where they can frankly address each other's concerns without resorting to megaphone diplomacy.
So dial down the public accusations, pick up the phone, and start talking.
Yeah.
What else can be done to rebuild trust, especially on the issue that seems to be the biggest thorn in the side, the Khalistan question?
Right. Well, India and Canada already have a framework in place.
Yeah.
The Framework for Cooperation on Countering Terrorism and Violent Extremism, signed back in 2018. This could be a good foundation for enhanced cooperation on counterterrorism efforts. They need to find a way to work together on this issue, but in a manner that respects India's sovereignty and addresses its security concerns.
That makes sense. Collaborate on tackling the real security threats, but do it in a way that doesn't feel like one side is dictating terms to the other. What about the economic front? How can they get those stalled agreements back on track?
It's time to get back to the negotiating table and inject some momentum into those stalled CEPA and FIPA talks. Reviving these discussions would send a positive signal that both countries are committed to mending their economic ties. There's a lot of potential for win-win cooperation, and they need to start capitalizing on it.
So revive the economic dialogue, focus on shared interests, and look for those win-win solutions. Are there any other avenues they could explore to rebuild this relationship?
People-to-people ties are incredibly important. The Indian diaspora can play a constructive role here, encouraging diaspora engagement and track 2 diplomacy. That's diplomacy through non-governmental channels could help bridge the divide.
Right. So leverage those cultural connections, the shared history, the personal relationships. It's about building bridges instead of burning them. All right, future diplomats, here's where we tie this back to your UPSC prep. Imagine you're in that exam hall and you get a question about India-Canada relations. What are the key points you absolutely need to nail?
First, you need to demonstrate a clear understanding of the historical trajectory of this relationship. Talk about those early ties, the significant Indian diaspora, the collaboration in areas like nuclear energy and defense. But then you need to dive into the recent downturn. Explain the Khalistan issue, why it's a major sticking point for India, and the security concerns around unaddressed extradition requests.
So start with the historical context, then lay out the core issues, particularly the Khalistan factor. What else?
You have to go beyond just the Khalistan issue. Talk about those stalled economic agreements, CEPA and FIPA, and how they're adding to the strain. Don't forget to mention the role of domestic politics in Canada and how the Sikh vote influences their foreign policy decisions. Show the examiner you understand that it's a complex web of factors.
That's about connecting the dots, showing the examiner you see the big picture. What about the significance of this relationship? Why does it even matter in the grand scheme of things?
That's where you bring in the strategic and economic stakes. Talk about the shared interest in a stable Indo-Pacific, especially in the context of China's rise. Mention the potential for economic cooperation, that $10 billion trade volume, those massive investments by Canadian pension funds. Make sure to highlight the potential fallout, the strain on strategic partnerships, the economic losses, the impacts on the diaspora.
Okay, so paint a realistic picture of what's at risk if things don't improve. And what about solutions? How do you wrap up this answer with a sense of optimism a way forward?
And by discussing potential solutions, constructive dialogue, cooperation on counterterrorism, resumption of economic negotiations, and the role of people-to-people ties.
So basically demonstrate that you understand the problem, its significance, and the possible paths to resolution. Now remember, this isn't just about acing an exam. This is about understanding the dynamics of international relations, about how domestic politics can spill over into foreign policy, about managing complex relationships in a world that's constantly changing.
Exactly. And the India-Canada situation provides a fascinating case study for anyone interested in diplomacy, international security, and the global balance of power.
All right, future policymakers, before we sign off, here's one final thought for you to ponder. Given India's strategic priorities and its position on the world stage, how should it navigate this tricky relationship with Canada in the long run? It's a tough question, one with no easy answers, but it's a question worth grappling with. So keep researching, keep analyzing, and most importantly, keep thinking critically. That's what'll make you a truly insightful and effective diplomat. Until next time, happy prepping.